Back with a congressman representing the 3rd District of East Tennessee and the state of Tennessee, Congressman Chuck Fleischmann. John North.
Congressman, right before the break, you touched on something that made me perk my ears up because I wasn't fully aware of it. And I'd like some clarification, if you can, in terms of numbers or degree. You mentioned that there were actually truly foreigners coming from outside Central America through and at our borders. Can you clarify, like, what numbers we're talking about? I hadn't heard about that.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we only know those who we apprehended. In a large sense, we have seen such a tremendous uptick, almost a 300% uptick. For specifics, 430,000 families were apprehended this year. But in terms of those
and how does that compare, Congressman, just so we have some frame of reference, how does that compare to previous years?
A 300% increase.
Thank you.
We have seen, and that's very valid, we have seen a tremendous uptick in the amount of unaccompanied minors. These folks are being abused. The cartels are taking unfair advantage of our porous laws. But to address your specific question, we know specifically of at least 13 known terrorists who've been apprehended at the southern border. And what I mean by that, people who have a known background or a willingness to do us harm. But what we don't know, and this is what's very unfortunate, is how many people who have actually come through the southern border and are in this country.
Is the southern border, though, really the place in terms of that? I've always heard that in terms of outside infiltration of that kind, you need to worry more about the seaports.
Seaports are important. It's all part of the same problem. The United States, fortunately, is a very large, beautiful country, but we have several borders. And we have a southern border, we have a northern border, but right now the magnitude of people coming across the southern border is overwhelming. I talked to the men and women who've done a wonderful job at CBP. Every day they go to work. Many of these people tell me because of the lack of personnel and the tremendous volume of people, they will actually have to go and take somebody and stay with them at a hospital or healthcare facility while they're being treated. That means they cannot fulfill their job keeping our borders safe. It's just overrun with people.
Congressman, I'm curious, it seems like you've alluded to a lot of times that the problems with human trafficking and violence and things on the border are due to the cartels. Do you think a border wall is the best way to address that when it's our country's insatiable appetite for drugs that's fueling the power with those cartels?
Another excellent question. The wall is necessary, but it's not the only solution. It's part of the solution. When I went down there with an open mind. Obviously, I knew when I got this key position in the House, I was going to have to deal with wall funding, and I promised the president I would look at it and get him the funding if I felt it was appropriate. I totally agree with him. The men and women told me that where the wall works, it is a deterrent. It slows people down. It's not 100% cure. We need other technologies as well. But you're absolutely right. We have got to curb our appetite for drugs. I've gone all across East Tennessee even today, and what I've done, I've talked to school children, I've talked to older students, and I said, please don't do drugs. I go back to the old Nancy Reagan, just say no.
Which some could argue didn't really work.
Yeah, it seems that the current war on drugs has gone on for decades with only appetite for those drugs increasing. It doesn't seem productive.
Well, and I think part of the problem, sadly, is some of the moves towards legalization, particularly with marijuana. Just today, the federal government came out and said, hey, guess what? Marijuana is dangerous to younger people, to pregnant women. Well, I think that's rather clear on its face, but our nation's appetite for drugs has got to be quelled and stopped. If there's no market for it, then you won't see it coming across.
Prisons aren't the answer, though, are they? We've figured out that we jam the prisons, federally and in state prisons, with offenders, and then we realize we've got too many people in our prisons. We can't cover that. It's too expensive, so now we seem to be going the other way.
I voted for justice reform. The president wanted it. Republicans and Democrats had a bipartisan effort on it, and it wasn't a unanimous effort, but it was something that when I looked at that, I think you're right. But as I spoke with prosecutors even today, we've got to look at this. Obviously, people who are addicted have a problem and need treatment. However, prosecutors, I think, are right. They want the criminal aspect of the law in place in addition to treatment. So it's not a free pass, but we've got to look at other alternatives, I think, to just solely incarceration. What we're seeing is too many people incarcerated, they come out, they re-abuse, and sadly many of these people die.
We're going to pivot to other topics when we come back with Congressman Chuck Fleischmann right here on Inside Tennessee.